Hello, friends. In this episode, I talked to Jason Pickard, who became a billion-dollar portfolio manager and partner to hedge fund legend Paul Tudor Jones at Tudor Investment. By the age of 26, he was recognized as one of the 30 under 30 top traders in the world, yet his health was on an absolute decline. He was at 150 kilos and suffered from a mental and physical health crisis. In becoming a healer and teacher, he's now offering his mentorship and making the world a better place. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and without further ado, let's jump right in. Hello, Jason.
Hey, Max. How are you, bud?
I'm perfect. Look, your dream when you were 6 years old, right, was to become this big Wall Street legend. And then you found yourself at 26 in that big health crisis, right? Like you've been 30 under 30 top traders in the world. You become the youngest partner at Paul Tudor Jones, and still you found yourself in that unpleasant situation. Like, take me to that moment when you realized that you had to basically change your lifestyle at that point.
Yeah. Well, my dream at 6 was a little bit different. My dream at 6 was to become a professional drummer and a magician. Those were my first interests, and that actually is still a big part of my life, and I think was a big part of my success on Wall Street and as a coach. So we could get back to that if you want, but yeah, essentially at 26, despite having a lot of privileges and great parents and a lot of support, I found myself really in a health crisis. And so it's interesting that you could have a certain upbringing that could be very supportive, but you could have your own kind of individual path. And for me, I found myself at 26. I was really successful financially. I kind of exceeded all of my own expectations and the expectations of probably any of my collegiate peers, and probably was more successful on paper than any of them were. But it was quite a paradox because I was 330 pounds. I don't know what that's in kg, but a lot for this European audience. Probably like
140 or something.
150 kg, yeah, or something like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was quite in a bad shape. I was in bad shape. I was getting these like infections, and I was really messed up, really unhappy, really uncomfortable. Couldn't find clothes to fit me. I was going to like big and tall stores, and I was big but not tall. So, I'm buying pants that were like 8 inches too long for me, having to get them tailored up and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, I just had this moment of crisis where I kind of realized like this isn't sustainable. And I thought about like, what am I going to do with this if I'm not going to be alive? If I'm not going to live past 40 years old, if I don't have any love, relationships in my life, if I don't have health, what's really the point of it all? And, I had some really amazing people in my life. My dad was quite concerned with me at that time, and he came and really supported me in turning my life around. And even Paul Tudor Jones pulled me into his office and said, listen, I just don't know anybody who is sustainably successful who doesn't take care of themselves. You're successful at 26, but if I look around at all of my friends who are hedge fund managers in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, all of them seem to have at least some sort of exercise practice and some sort of health, because it doesn't seem to be sustainable to be at that out of balance and to be in this game for a long period of time. And yeah, so a few of these things, came up. I even went to go see this doctor at the time who really didn't have a lot of advice for me. It was an infectious disease doctor because I started getting these infections from being sick. And it was almost just like his kindness, just like saying, hey, you can do this. Like, you can turn this around. And it was just a few of those things in a row, and kind of coupled with my own pain, that I said, you know what, I'm just going to go for this. And so I started focusing on exercise around 26 or 27 years old. And I worked out extremely hard for about 2 years. And the interesting thing was I lost half my body weight, but there was still something missing. I had this bank account now, and I had this body that looked pretty good, but I still didn't feel like that deeper sense of fulfillment that I was really ultimately seeking, like a sense of belonging, a sense of confidence, a happiness. It was still a little bit flat in my life. And that's when I realized that this was more of an inner journey, that I needed to have an exchange rate for the outer world, for the inner world, and really begin to explore that. And that really started off my more of my spiritual quest that started in 2009, and really discovering what this inner landscape was all about.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, but with me, I think it started probably around my Saturn return. You know, like 29, I had like a big health crisis.
Mm-hmm.
I had these little, bits and pieces come up, like accidents beforehand and stuff. But obviously I didn't change enough. So that big bang came when I was like 29. So I had to
Yeah.
change a lot. And yeah, it was a good journey so far. But yeah, painful. But we can get into pain a bit later if you want.
Yeah.
But yeah,
It's a powerful awakener. It's a
yeah,
powerful awakener. It shows you where you're out of balance, and really, without the pain, how would you know that you're off track? And so, in some ways, it's really our ally.
yeah,
If we didn't have little symptoms along the way, we might not know that we have a disease that's brewing. So, in some way, we can be grateful to our pain because it's awakening us to where we're out of balance, or where we need to change, or where we even need to look. So yeah, I mean, a lot of times we kind of run away from the pain, and I understand that. But in reality, it's there sort of as our guide
100%.
to show us where we need to change.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's probably around that age. I mean, I know just a few people that understand that pain happens for you, right? Like all these situations happen for you at that age. Like it's mostly later on, right? Like in the 30s, that at least us men, we kind of realize what's really going on, right? And how this thing works. But like, I mean, at least me in my 20s, I was, just like going for the fast track, not really focusing on my personal development. And I also thought business and personal life could be separated, right? Like if I don't have to excel in one, like the other one is still possible at an excellent level. It was a little bit different than in your case because, with me, it wasn't like as crazy in the business sense as with you. But yeah, I realized then that I have to do the work on both ends, and then it can kind of be a nice level that I can live with. But let's go back a bit. Like when you were still at your parents' house, were you guys talking about finance at home? Because like both of you brothers basically ended up on that route as well, right? Like just like your
Well,
dad.
I have one brother. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
my dad was an incredible role model for me in that way. He was an extremely hardworking, successful business person who also had an incredible balance. One of the things that was like one of the biggest lessons for me was that he was working this like wild Wall Street job, very busy, very demanding job, but he'd always would make it to like my after school, like, lacrosse or football game or soccer game at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And I always remember looking up in the stands and thinking, how do you do that? How do you actually do that? How do you actually manage that balance? So it was an incredible early lesson for me in being successful, doing something you love, having a lot of integrity, and also finding time to show up for the family. And, he was a really great role model for me in that way. So I wouldn't say that growing up, I was necessarily had this huge education in finance, but things were, I watched a lot. I mean, there were some very influential moments. There was this moment early on when Russia defaulted on their debt, and it was a big deal. Later on, there were books written about this. I can't remember the name, but it was about a hedge fund called Long Term Capital Management, which was interestingly a bunch of academic PhDs that were put together, and they wound up blowing up because of at least partly because of Russia defaulting on their debt. That essentially they could something they couldn't model. So they thought they had this whole thing figured out by like kind of an academic perspective, but they weren't really able to think like outside the confines of um, what was modeled in books, or what was possible in their own known universe.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just a simple thing of seeing that happening and watching with my dad on TV, and then seeing him spring into action and make phone calls and make decisions. And I just love the intensity of like, wow, things are happening in the world. And it actually has an impact on the decisions that you could be making now and on the companies that you're working for now, and that there could be positive and negative impacts in real time based on world events. And so situations like that. Another really interesting early example was when my dad was working for Tudor Investment, is a company that I ultimately went to work for. They had this cross hedge fund competition, like a family picnic, but they would have like various events like baseball, softball, tug of war, volleyball, and these hedge funds would compete against each other, and they took it very seriously. And sort of the gold standard of the whole thing was the tug of war.
Hmm.
It was like, who's the toughest, you know, who could win the tug of war. And my dad was like the captain of the team, and some of the members of the company that were in the tug of war competition would come to my house like after work and practice for the tug of war. And it was like, you know, it's seemingly this like small thing, but it's like these little breadcrumbs along the way where I was like, wow, I love the competition. I love the intensity. I love the teamwork. I love how much they're caring and putting into this seemingly inconsequential event. And this whole idea of how you do anything is how you do everything. And it was like these kind of breadcrumbs along the way that really turned me on. When I was about 13 or 14, my dad came home with this video called Trader, I believe, that was kind of a documentary about Paul Tudor Jones and how he timed the 1987 market crash and made, I think at the time, $100 million, which was, you know, it's a phenomenal amount of money now, but in 1987, it was kind of unheard of to do that in one day off of a stock market crash. And when I saw that video, that's when the dream to become a trader really came online. That's when it kind of shifted from the drummer magician into the Wall Street trader. So yeah, my early childhood was extremely influential in this dream of really just kind of paying attention and watching and being exposed to things, and really getting that passion to want it. You know, trading is an interesting thing in that it's a hard thing really to learn in a book. It's really learned through direct experience. You know,
Yeah.
there's really no amount of classroom knowledge that can prepare you for being a trader. And so it's all about kind of having that experience, having that exposure, getting into the right mindset and being around these particular events. And so just kind of by being exposed to that really kind of consecrated for me the idea of wanting to go that route. And that was really all I was interested in after that.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, I lived in London when I was like 19, 20. And I also, at that time, you know, finance sounded cool. And then I met all these people, like, you know, addicted, like big time in their 40s. And you know, the wife that they barely see every week. And they all told me their horror stories, kind of, right? Like of no family life and just like focusing on these kind of, you know, uppers and downers in the morning and in the evening. And I'm like, hey, this is probably not it. Because it was like across the board, right? Like everyone I met was either an alcoholic or, you know, all the substances that are kind of involved, which
You know,
was crazy to
I
me.
saw that. I saw that too. But at the same time, I think that, you know, all sides of the continuum do exist. You know, like I said, my dad was a perfect example of balance.
Hmm.
You know, I would go in to work with him early when I was interning at his company when I was like 16 or 17 years old. And he was working out with a martial artist, you know, 6 o'clock in the morning before work and, you know, eating healthy and living a pretty balanced life. Paul Tudor Jones was another fantastic example. Like, I really looked up to him not only as a mentor in the Wall Street world, but also how he lived a very balanced life. He was a very, you know, here's a billionaire, very big guy, you know, big in the terms of has his hands in a lot of different things, running a company. The way he treated people, the way he held himself, the way he focused on his health, the way he was kind of integrated into his family and cared about his family, how philanthropic he was. And even in the simple things like the ways he would comment on like recent movies and funny, you know, comedy shows. And, you know, he was a very down to earth guy. So I saw kind of both ends of the spectrum. I saw people that were very balanced, and I also saw people that were having strokes on the trading floor and were having heart attacks and heart disease and high levels of anxiety and going through relationship challenges and poor health and, medicated and addicted and that kind of thing. So I really got exposed to the continuum of possibilities. In my early career, I fell into the camp of, things going poorly for you, and I was on the fast track to having a very medicated, addicted lifestyle, and I was able to turn it around. I think partly because I saw it was possible through my dad and through Paul Tudor Jones. And so I think that the idea is that it's not like a guarantee that you're going to fall into any one trap. I think that kind of lifestyle does lead to more of an inclination. I don't know. I mean, if you look at the studies, most young people like young males that go into Wall Street and are working in investment banks have higher levels of anxiety and depression than an average person, an average male at that age. So I do think that it does lead to that. It's more likely to be that, but it's certainly not the case for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's probably similar to when you have like no money and a lot of money, like all the traits that you had when you had no money will probably just be like exemplified, right? When you actually have a lot of money. At least that's like a little bit what with my experience have seen. Like it's already there, and it's just at a different level later on, and probably the same there as well. Like if you can cope with stress when you're younger and that job is for you, then sure, why not, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that could be helpful in that industry, which is what I focus on in my course, is educating people on how to do that. How do you eat to support your stress? How do you eat to support your mental focus and balance in your body? How do you learn how to breathe, and how do you learn mental and emotional strategies? How do you connect with your creativity and maybe a bigger sense of why? And how do you find more of a work-life balance? Because all these things ultimately not only keep us healthy, but they improve our performance. And so it's not really a possibility, but it's actually a profitable reality to take care of yourself, and to train like you're an athlete for work. That didn't come easy for me. But once I got a hang of it, I kind of ran away with it and went to the other extreme. Yeah, because ultimately, it sort of fulfills itself where you are starting to feel better and you're performing better and you're feeling better and you're performing better. For me, it did hit a point of diminishing returns though, where the passion to be on Wall Street started to dwindle after doing it for about 20 years, where my passion for health and wellness and spirituality started to grow. And I realized that I had such respect for that industry and how hard it is to make money that I decided that it was no longer time for me to be there, because I knew I couldn't do it half-ass. I mean, people are putting trillions of dollars of resources into trying to scalp fractions of a millisecond to make money. And if I'm, there's a point where the meditation and the exercise and the diet and the spiritual practice actually help. But when it becomes to the point where like that's all you're really focusing on, it actually starts to diminish from the trading, because you kind of go overboard too far into the other camp. So that's when I left the trading world and I started going into the coaching world. But the interesting thing was, when I was a trader, I would dream at night of being a coach. I was, really dreaming of like more kind of metaphorical things of like drum circles and shamanic healings and being in nature, right? Because that was a part of me that was sort of repressed. But when I became a coach, it was crazy. I started dreaming of the markets at night. I was having trading dreams constantly, because that was a part of me that I kind of swept under the rug for a period of time. And that's when it came to me that for me, or for anybody, to really be at our best, we have to find the balance between these two worlds. We have to find the balance between the trader and the coach. We have to find the balance between the wealth and the well-being, or the wealth and the spirituality. And it's that kind of middle way between the two that's the sweet spot for sustainable abundance, which is essentially why I created my course, to teach that, but also because it's a continuous learning process for me. I'm still trying to find out how to actually embody the abundance archetype, which is what I called my course, in my own life. And I'm learning by teaching it as well, and having created this course.
Yeah, I think teaching is learning, right? Like that's when you actually learn, like deep down.
For me, it's taken to what's called a second simplicity, where I've learned the things, but in order to really master them and teach them, you have to find a way to take a complex subject and speak about it in simple terms.
Mm.
And that process of refinement or maturation is where you really begin to learn it. Being able to explain something that's complex in simple terms is moving into the field of mastery of the subject that you're working at. And so that's what teaching has done for me. It's my students have pushed me by asking questions about things that I kind of knew or embodied or understood, but hadn't been able to explain using like simple metaphors and simple terms and practical examples of how they can use it in their life. And so over the past year that I've been teaching and doing this program, it's certainly pushed me and stretched me a lot. And I've realized that this idea of abundance is not a place that you actually can get to. It's sort of like the idea of enlightenment. There's no like, okay, I'm enlightened, and then, what's next? What's on the other side of this wall? It's almost like space. It's an infinite horizon. So as soon as you think you got there to the horizon point, you look off in the distance, and the horizon's like, 5 miles down the road. Because the whole point of being here is to grow and to learn, and it's a constant process. And there's no sort of, okay, now I'm enlightened or now I'm abundant. For me, it's the abundance archetype that is calling me. It's alive in me. It's ever evolving and growing, and it's a lifelong process.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there was a couple of points I wanted to touch upon, but the painful moments that you had, right? Like especially, I remember in the prep, the one when you ate the duck. That kind of stood out to me a little bit because it wasn't that far in the past, right? Like that just happened a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like, was that kind of, did that come out of nowhere to you? Like something so major that it was still, cooking inside of you after like so many years of that deep work that you did, especially also with Paul Chek?
Yeah. Well, so what you're referring to is a couple years ago, I had a piece of duck, and even though it was very organic and wild, free range, and beautiful duck that lived a good life, I started experiencing like extreme lower abdominal pains the next day. And without going into like a 2-hour conversation on that, it basically led to an appendicitis that I tried to treat at home on my own by fasting and kind of more natural approaches that wound up perforating, and then which is your appendix actually explodes. And now you're in a really bad place where you have an infection and you're in the hospital and you're dealing with all sorts of stuff. So it was quite a shock for me being a healthy guy and practicing these practices for many years that this happened to me. There's a lot of different ways to look at it. In terms of physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, we could say. On one hand, I had been really overweight for a good portion of my life, right? And so are there some kind of ramifications of that were downstream that, I hadn't totally addressed, possibly? Are there karmic influences of essentially like what I'm here to learn in this life and how much sort of deeper empathy that situation gave me an understanding of myself and of others' pains and what's it like to be in the hospital and what's it like to have a near-death experience, which I did. There was a lot of spiritual growth that came out of that. It was a very challenging time for me personally. I lost like 60 pounds in like 2 weeks. I was in the hospital. I was cut open. I couldn't move. I had to nurse myself back. I had to really become extremely resilient and say to myself, like, I'm not going to be back here. The medical system, while it kind of saved my life, at the same time, it had no help for me in terms of recovery or prevention.
Mm.
And I had to take that into my own hands and really kind of double down on my strength in natural approaches. You can even go into the emotional components of the emotions that maybe I was still repressing, or the amount of flow in my life. I'd also done an extensive amount of travel to Africa, like 7 or 8 times. And I think in hindsight, what I had was still sort of parasite issues from having lived in the bush. I did 2 weeks with the San Bushmen in Namibia, where I lived in a tribe for 2 weeks and did a persistence hunt. It was like eating what we caught and living, on a dirt floor in a tribe in the middle of the desert. And so it's like, to pin it on any one thing, I think, is too linear. The human body is so complex. It's really beyond imagination, beyond our mind to really try to pinpoint it. And I think that's one of the things that, people kind of get wrong is like, oh, it's like this one thing. Well, we're such multidimensional beings, but it was certainly an experience that I am now grateful I had because I am significantly healthier. Not only did it have me double down on my own inner work, my relationships, my spiritual practices, I started understanding what was happening to me astrologically. For some reason, when I was in the hospital, I grabbed the book, the Bhagavad Gita, which is like the main crux of the whole yogic lineage. And that opened up 3 years of deep yogic study with my yogic guru, Jeffrey Armstrong Kavijarishi. So there's a lot of things that are very mysterious about this whole thing. I also started working with Dr. Guy Voyer of the Eldoa method, an osteopath from France, and I've been seeing him a few times a year. And in this effort of rehabbing my body, I've totally reformed my spine, my organs, my structure. So I would say in every way possible, I am healthier from having gone through that.
Yeah.
But it was a very difficult, challenging road. But it seems as if I needed to happen because I'm in a way better place than before. So these are the mysterious things of life that are hard to really understand why they're happening. But I think how we respond to them and our attitude towards them is the more important thing and what's up to us.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's when, the universe kind of gives you the option. Do you grow or do you succumb to the pain? Do you give up, right? With me, I had like severe nerve pain, right? Like neck, like the whole arm burning, right? Like couldn't sleep for a couple of weeks. And the same thing as you, right? Like the medical system, they just want to operate, right? Like there's no other solution, right? Let's get the scalpel out and do the operation. It's an old injury. And then through the work, I realized, well, it was an emotional thing, right? Then triggered all the pain, all the old injuries, very weak point in the body, right? Yeah, but that takes a long time to understand, right? Where that comes from. In that moment, you think like, why is this happening to me? Why now? Like you have no idea.
Yeah. And, one thing I want to say about that is like, I used to be quite against, maybe not even like verbally, but just like on my inner landscape, I was quite against the medical system and the traditional medical system. And, honestly, there are some good reasons to be against the traditional medical system. Especially in this country, we have one of the lowest ranks in the developing country medical systems, in the United States, I'm talking about. I know you're in Croatia. I don't know what it's like there, but the medical system with all the resources that we have in the United States, we don't do a great job with it. But the point is that I was really against that. And to the degree that I was against that, I actually found myself needing a situation where they saved my life. And to the degree that I was against the medical system and really focused on having a home birth for my first 3 children, I wound up having, not me personally, obviously, because, the women in my life were having C-sections in the hospital, even though we had planned and done everything right to have it at birth. But when I finally recognized and reconciled that there was this purpose for the medical system and that there really, it's not to be against, it's to be looked at as a tool, and a very good tool if you use it appropriately, and a very bad tool if you misuse it, that I feel as if my need to go and use them has vanished by really appreciating them and being grateful for them. And, all of a sudden my 4th child was just born at home in our bathtub with no problems, no complications, just like ease after, going 0 for 3 on the first 3. And I feel like I'm in great health and I have no need for the medical system. But there was something about me fighting so hard against it and repressing it in some way that actually I think brought it on some level into my life.
Yeah, I mean, I come from a family that, my parents are always off service, right? Especially also in the medical field. And I grew up with homeopathy, acupuncture, right? Like Rudolf Steiner, all that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, I also saw, the normal medical system, right? Like the prescriptions and the medicine and everything that goes wrong was kind of
Yeah.
standing out a lot. So I've seen like both sides, and I've always seen that there's good and bad, but it's very difficult to find the good.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
it's like with everything, the 5%, right? Like at most.
yeah. I mean, one of my mentors, Paul Chek, says there's no bad drugs. There's just incorrectly prescribed drugs.
Yeah.
And the same thing can go with exercise or, treatments or, they're all incredible technologies. They're all amazing tools, but they have to be used in the right circumstances. Most of these kinds of things are overprescribed. And one of the things that we see, statistically is actually a lot of complications and death by doctor error or overprescription of drugs or mixing of drugs, pharmaceutical drugs and things like that. So you have to be very careful, but we also can appreciate them for their gifts.
Yeah, definitely. For sure. The moment you had your kid in the bathtub, like how do you handle that when you know that the others were, came to life in a different way, right?
Yeah.
Like, because it's better for them as well, right? Like how do you handle that? Because we've also gone through that kind of phase.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of ways to look at it. I mean, better for them is hard to say because, sure, natural birth on the physical level, a child going through the vaginal canal gets a certain amount of bacteria that helps with the gut biome and immunity. And there's also a lot of other development things about actually going through and
It's
coming
like a
out
fight,
kind of
right?
in the natural way. Kind of like if you crack open an egg to take the chicken out, it doesn't survive. The chicken has to actually go through the egg and kind of go through that struggle. But on some other level, that there might be something that soul needed to experience for some reason as part of that type of birth that is beyond our understanding, right? So I don't look at it as better or worse. I just look at it as like that's what kind of happened and that was what was needed in that moment. I'm certainly really grateful. I mean, in terms of the experience, seeing your partner get cut open in surgery and having doctors take your child under bright lights and putting them under, measuring them and flipping them around and doing all this crazy stuff to them. And then being in the hospital environment with people checking on you every 2 hours and pricking you and poking you and whatever, versus like being in your bathtub and then just like rolling right into your bed with the lights dimmed and family there. And, I mean, it doesn't even compare, right? In terms of the gentleness of the experience and not actually, and for my wife, not actually having to recover from a surgery. But on one level, I would say that it's in some ways, all of the children and all of the family in some way is sharing a same thread. And one thing that I felt on some level was that experience for her being born that way was healing for all of us, including the other three, even on a subtle, energetic level. I felt like, wow, this is a big deal. Like this is like a healing thing for the whole family that we can all participate in this birth that was done in this way, that something has shifted where now, there's some sense of completion. And
Yeah,
we all got to, enjoy that beauty and be with her at home and not have to be separated from the kids or the other kids for multiple days and go through all of the hoops that you have to go through in the hospital, which, like I said, I was grateful the other times because we tried and we needed them. And so that's what was needed then. And this is what was available to us now. And you just do the best with what you can. When a child is born C-section, there are things you can do to help support them along the way. It's not like it's game over for them in terms of the gut bacteria and through other things. You can work with cranial nerves, and you can work with various specialists, biodynamic craniosacral work, many other things to help kind of stimulate those things that maybe not were turned on fully by going through that way. And when my third child was born, the midwives at home, who I trusted a lot, were saying that the cord was wrapped in a particular way that if the child went through the birth canal, they might not be breathing, and they didn't have the tools to resuscitate the kid. And so in that scenario, you're just like grateful for that. And so, yeah, I don't think there's any better or worse, but to the degree that you resonate with having a home birth and you have trusted people, and that feels good, especially to the woman, that's like something that she wants. I think it's absolutely amazing experience, and I'm just so grateful to have experienced that in my lifetime at this point.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, it's like this concept of time, right? Like kind of man-made, and then you realize once you've had that change happen, right, that it can heal the past, right? Like it can heal the future in a sense. Is that
Yeah.
is that concept? Is that when did you understand that concept? Was that through medicine, like a journey you took, or were you always aware of these kind of?
That phenomenon can be a little bit esoteric for people to understand in practical terms, but just to kind of keep it simple, I think those kinds of scenarios help us change how we view the past. If we have somebody in our life that hurt us along the way and we're holding a particular story against them, and then we get to a particular point in our life when we're able to forgive them, in some way it changes the past. It changes how we feel about the past. Are you going back in time? We're getting into like the realms of like quantum physics and things, which, these kinds of things are actually seem to be provable in kind of other dimensionalities of how the universe works. But I think it changes how we feel about it, which is the most important, is that our perspective shifts. And that, I think, is a really important practical thing in terms of shifting timelines, going backwards and forwards.
Yeah, because it's about the now, right? And as you said, if you feel the difference, then the past is different, right?
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I've kind of reconciled these sort of complex theories of time, is that it's more important about how do we feel about it now, and how has that shifted, and how are we carrying that in ourselves that can actually change our own past, because it's the story we're holding that has now shifted about that event, and that shapes how we move forward in life.
Yeah. When did you start meditating?
Well, that's a good question. It was when I started losing the weight in 2006, 2007, I lost 170 pounds. And then I went to see Paul Chek around that time. And he had told me that I was completely burnt out. I had like basically stage 3 or 4 adrenal fatigue. Around that time, I don't remember the exact order, but around that time, I started working with William C.C. Chen, who's a Tai Chi grandmaster in New York City, who's still my teacher to this day. He's in his 90s now. He's an amazing guy. William C.C. Chen, grandmaster of Tai Chi. And I started working with this older woman who lived on the Upper West Side of New York City. She's probably, gosh, at least in her 80s now. Her name was Bernice. And I started sitting with her. So I found these two kind of very interesting, different parts of the world. I don't want to say elderly, but elders. There's a difference between elderly people and elders. They were elderly in the context of their age, but they were elders in their wisdom, and they were much younger in their sort of in the way they carried themselves. But yeah, I would go once or twice a week and sit with Bernice and learn sort of the basics of mindfulness-based meditation. I think MSBR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, in the school of John Kabat-Zinn was what I first learned. And then I was learning how to do moving meditation in the Tai Chi schools. And that really has been a practice that has evolved through many different facets to this day.
Yeah, it's interesting how Tai Chi is kind of the basis for most martial arts, right? Yoga, also the basis of them. I don't know, like, which arts did you pursue? And because I know you did a lot and you're probably still doing a lot, but like, what were the couple that really shifted a lot for you?
In terms of movement stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, for me, really, it was the Tai Chi.
Mm.
The Tai Chi has various kind of components of it. There's various forms. There's a sword form. There's a push hands, which is more of like a hard to describe, but you're just trying to like see if you can push the other person off balance, so to speak. And so I really just kind of stuck with all of those varieties of forms. I've never been like actually too physically aggressive in terms of wanting to do like combat type sports, which is kind of interesting because as a man, when I was younger, I felt a little bit kind of like a wuss about that. I never was one that really loved to get into fights, like physical fights. Like I'd see my friends getting into fist fights, and I was like, it's just not for me. I was very physical in sports, like very physical in sports. But like in terms of fist fights and getting like punched in the face, it wasn't my thing. And I always kind of felt bad about it. But then I later started understanding Vedic astrology. And I saw that Mars, which is generally classified as the house of aggression, was in like the weakest position in my chart, the same position that Gandhi had, who was all about like nonviolence. So that's when I started understanding that more as a strength, that there's some kind of quality I have and also a place for me to grow into as well. And so, yeah, historically for me, the kind of the more physical combat stuff has not been my forte, but actually within the Tai Chi realm, we do a lot of what would be kind of more like kickboxing, where it's basically using the mechanics of Tai Chi's to throw punches, blocks, and kicks. But I haven't ventured outside of that in terms of martial arts. But I'm certified as a teacher in that, and I've gone through like all the trainings. I still meet with Master Chen to this day, now online because I don't live in New York City anymore. But this is like 15 years later that I've still been dedicated to learning from him.
Amazing. So you actually have like a lot of like long, relationships with your coaches, because like with me was these past couple years, it was mostly like, let's say a couple months at the time, or just a couple of sessions, and it just gave me that one thing that I needed to progress. Right. Like, so you have that one, and then
I've had quite a bit of
right?
long relationships. Yeah, I mean, everyone's got to find their own groove on that. I mean, I've been working with Paul Chek since that time. I've been working with Master Chen, and I don't want to leave anybody out, but a few other people for many years. Some people kind of come and go. Some people you meet for one session or not. I mean, honestly, my personal journey has been kind of graduating from the student to the teacher. I'm a really good student, and my big edge was taking it out in the world and being a teacher. And so I kind of did this whole student thing really well, and I learned from all these people, and I'm still learning. But over the last couple of years, I've been gradually clawing back on how many people I'm actually working with, and in terms of as a student, and really primarily now working as a teacher and as a guide and a coach. So that's been a transition that's been happening now, where those things are kind of going the other way. But yeah, I've developed some really beautiful relationships with a lot of people that lasted a long time, that I felt like had a lot to give. And, each relationship has its own shelf life and expires at some point where you feel like, maybe even you're outgrowing them, or you've taken, you become their teacher possibly. And some people grow along with you, and you develop a relationship that is long lasting. And, maybe you don't need to see them all the time, but as a challenge comes up, they come into your life, and, to each their own on that, for real.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
But I will say there is a benefit, I think, to finding the right teacher that you can go deep with. There is a challenge of bouncing around from like one thing to the next, and I've experienced this myself. You wind up drilling a lot of shallow wells without really going too deep in one. Like if I did Tai Chi for a year, and then this for a year, and then that for a year, I wouldn't have gone to the depths of Tai Chi that I've done in 15 years of studying with one teacher. But it also has to be the right teacher, and you have to have the right passion to want to do it. So I'll just leave
Yeah.
it at that.
Yeah. I think for me, it's the physical like meeting, right? Like then I can stick to it. Like I have the same Muay Thai teacher, for a while. He's probably going to be, my teacher for another while. And like I can stick to that. It's no problem because I can see the difference in training and it feels better,
Yeah.
each time and all that kind of stuff. But like online, it's very difficult, especially when you do super deep stuff. I don't know. Like maybe there's going to be something on the horizon soon. Who knows?
Online is tricky, but I
Yeah.
thought the same thing. But to be honest, like the whole COVID era really opened my eyes to that. I got so many amazing trainings, and I have so many amazing students I meet with on a daily basis from around the world.
Yeah.
I mean, here we are talking. You're in Croatia. I'm in New York, and I have students from Mongolia, a lot in Australia, Canada, U.S., South America. And so it's pretty wild. And, we get on Zoom and we have this like really intimate space where we've developed a community, and, the technologies can be pretty incredible to bringing people together. Nothing replaces in person, but it's quite amazing. I've been really surprised on, I meet with my students 2 times a week. If you take my course, The Abundance Archetype, you get into this mentorship program where you meet with me 2 times a week online. And I brought in over the last 6 months, like 30 special guests from Paul Chek to Wall Street investors and everything in between. And so it's like being a part of this like private exclusive membership or podcast or mentorship program. And you get to go deep with me. And it's really blown me away how much not only have I grown, but my students have grown and transformed from being a part of this community online. And so, yeah, I think, it's all about finding where your passion is, where your passion is where your heart is, and where your heart is where your focus will be, and where your focus is where your flow comes, where this stuff comes naturally and effortlessly. And so if you find the right teacher that is, you feel right with, and, stick to it.
Yeah, for sure. How do you do that with your children? Like, are you going to push them like through a similar path that you kind of went through, or like how you planning on doing it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, my student, my you had mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned it before or after the call, but you talked about Rudolf Steiner. My children are in Waldorf schools. And so, from that perspective, their education is slightly different than mine. Because I wasn't in a Waldorf school, but, so they have Waldorf education. They're out in nature. They do nature schools. They do a lot of, there are a lot of sports now and various things like that. I think the most important thing with kids is really not the system. It's that you as a parent are their best educator. And like, how do you show up?
Yeah.
Or not? And, that is a question that I have to ask myself every single day. Like right now, I'm doing this podcast with you, and, my 2 of my kids are just out in the other room. And so what's the trade-off? Where does it make sense for me to be here with you and to share this knowledge with your audience versus going and, playing trucks with my son, or holding my 3-week-old? That's the dance that all of us parents have to make, is what's the right dance between work, self-care, partner, and children, and how do you make it all work? And I think that the most important thing is, if you model that, then that's probably the way that you're going to raise the best amount of children, or the best quality children. I think it's important to recognize each child as individual and unique, and that the origin of the education system, the word education comes from the Greek educare, which means to draw out from within. And that actually goes a little bit deeper to Sanskrit in adhikari, which is like one's willingness and readiness for knowledge based on what they love to do, what they're naturally good at, and what their astrological chart indicates as a propensity for them. But without going too deep into that, it's really like to draw out from within. So to do my best to witness each one of my kids as individuals, and to recognize their own unique gifts, skills, and talents, and to help them draw that out. and not actually impose too much of my own rigidity onto them. That's a really hard thing to do, and I work with that every single day.
Yeah, but it kind of goes against the education system, right? Like what we just talked about. Like you also talk about the infinite player, right? Like the infinite investor.
Yeah.
I think to get there is probably not possible. Or let's say it's not possible, but like much less, likely that you have a smooth way of getting there if you go through the normal education system, right? And that was kind of the question before, because I know I've also been to Waldorf kindergarten and stuff, and it's definitely different. But then afterwards, you get slapped with with school system, and then you get into that
Well, I mean,
rigidity that you talked about.
it really depends. I mean, my kids are, we're homeschooling our kids.
Yeah,
They go, they have Waldorf tutors and curriculum. You could be in a Waldorf school through 12th grade, and a lot of the research shows that those kids do extremely well because they're unique and they're creative and they love learning. The real basis of the Waldorf system, as far as I understand it, and I'm no expert on it, but it's not to tell them what to learn or what to think. It's to teach them how, to give them a love of learning, and then let them find out what they love and use the skills that are required to really go deep into something or to love learning to find that out for themselves. So, I don't think it's impossible in the education system, but I do think our education system certainly needs a lot of reform. There's a lot of different ways to skin that, but the education system, for one, really focuses mainly on one kind of learning, which is mostly like memorization. There are many other styles of learning. It doesn't really support the creative style so well, or auditory or kinesthetic type of learning. My experience, while I'm very grateful for that experience, I found that it didn't really differentiate too much for one's individual skill set. Like one of my best friends who built my house as a builder, and I had other attributes, right? Then I was not good with my hands, and he's really good with my hands, but with his hands. But both of us had the same kind of education until we got to college and could specialize. So I think it could do better about identifying each individual kid's unique skills and drawing it out from within and seeing them from a different perspective, like a Waldorf school would. I think we have a lot of problems with really too much intensity around the testing and the quizzing and the homeworks, which gives a lot of stress, which causes a lot of problems, including childhood suicide and teenage suicide, which in a lot of times is linked back to the anxiety of schools. So I think we have a long way to go in reforming that. I think the education that I had was quite good. At the same time, it didn't teach me certain aspects of life. It didn't teach me a lot about exercise or diet or spiritual practices or mental emotional things or psychology or play or creativity. I think that those kinds of things would be amazing if they could be incorporated into the traditional education system, like you find more in Waldorf. And I'm sure Waldorf school has its own shadow side too, and things it's missing. But I've found in my own personal experience that it raises more well-balanced children, or at least it works better for my own kids. I'll say that, and I'm going to continue to educate them in that way, probably for sure until college, and then I don't even know. I mean, I'm not thinking that far ahead about what's to come for that whole chapter of life. I still got a few years for that, but
yeah, that's amazing. I mean, at least you can decide what you want to do with them, right? Because like in Germany, for example, you cannot just homeschool them. It's not allowed.
Right.
Yeah. So,
yeah. Well, there's some privileges for wherever you are, and there's some
definitely
for sure.
Yeah.
They all have pluses and minuses, and the grass is always greener. But yeah, I mean, you do have homeschooling here. You do have some Waldorf schools, and you have all sorts of types of schools, and it's about really finding what works for you and your own kids.
Yeah, let's go a bit into that infinite player, infinite investor.
Yeah.
Topic, if you could explain.
Well, it's kind of a long topic, but ultimately, if you think about it, investing, one of the ways I could just break that down is that Paul Tudor Jones once came to me and said, "Look, it's not about how much you make on this one trade. Like the point is that if you're still here 10, 15, 20 years from now, you're going to be rich. that you never let any trade be your last. You never become so confident in any one idea where you put all the eggs in one basket. That the idea is not to hit a home run on one individual thing, but it's to be process oriented and sustainably good, and to always protect yourself, to have good risk management, and to be in the game 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years. That's how you become an infinite player. But, on a deeper level, the infinite player of life understands that the point is not winning and losing. It's about learning. If you look at research from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who is the father of flow research, at least in the modern era, he says that life fulfillment doesn't come from winning. It comes from winning or losing as long as you're challenged. Meaning if you play somebody in a game who's a little bit better than you, even if you lose, but you have a good fight and you learn something, people experience more fulfillment than if they beat up on somebody who's a beginner while they're advanced, right? So that's the infinite player. The infinite player realizes that we're always learning. We're here on an infinite journey. The point of being here is growth and discovery. And it wakes up each day asking deep questions about our investments, asking deep questions about our life. Who am I? Why am I here? How do I live life well? What do I need to review today? What do I need to let go of today? How can I look at my life differently? Think about a relationship. There's no winners in relationships. You don't win with your wife. It's about being an infinite player. It's about, how do I make this last for 40, 50 years or beyond, right? And so, and then ultimately it comes down to the fact that we are immortal beings. We are infinite players. We're the infinite players of life. And that's why we're here. And when I understood that perspective, it really helped me that why we're here, while we're doing the things we're doing, not like we don't care, not like we don't try hard, not like we don't live our life fully, but knowing that who we really are is an infinite player.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. Like for me, when I heard you talk about that, it was more like, it doesn't end with that one life, right? Like even whatever you want to fit into this experience, right? You can be sure if you don't finish, it will continue at some other point.
Yeah. What's been helpful for me, and again, like these are not things that like one can really prove, but you have to ask yourself, how does your philosophy work for you? How do you feel each day when you live your life thinking that you only have one life, and at the end it goes fade to black, and at any moment, it's going to be it, and if you screw up, you're going to go to eternal hell. Well, how does that feel for you? And how does it work in your life is the better question. Not just to feel like, how does that meta perspective, how does that worldview actually work in your life? Versus one that we're infinite players. We're on an infinite journey. We're never born. We never die. We're here going through millions and millions and millions of experiences of, moving up the chain through plants, animals, so all different kinds of humans on this infinite journey of growth and discovery. We've been every sex. We've been every race. We've been every nationality. We've been every religion. We've been everything. And living from that perspective, how does that work for you? And how does that feel? That, there is no rush to get it perfect, and you're not going to be judged eternally. It's just like you wouldn't punish your child for doing something wrong, for, send them to their room for the rest of their life. Maybe send them to their room for 5 minutes or something, depending on their age, or if you do that at all, you just say, look, this isn't working, and, I need you to do it this way or something like that. But, for me, the thing that works for me is living with the paradox of, I'm an infinite player. Who I am is what Sanskrit calls an atma, which comes from the word atome in Latin, atma led to atome in Latin, which led to atomic. And what atome means is uncuttable, because they thought that the atom or the atomic, the atom was uncuttable, was the smallest particle. Now we've found out in history that that's not true, that there are a lot smaller particles in the atom, but that was the idea of the atom, was that it was uncuttable. And in yoga, they say that the Atma, who we are as the Atma, can't be burned by fire, wet by water, dried by air, or cut by a sword. That we are infinite, immortal, indivisible, individual beings. And we're here on a courageous journey of growth and discovery. We visited here for that. Now, when you have that perspective, at the same time, on the other hand, you're holding the perspective that any moment could be my last. Any moment I could get run over by an 18-wheeler. Any moment my appendix could go, and that could be it. When you hold those two at the same time, when you have the ease of the infinite player, but the urgency of taking advantage of this moment, that's when I personally am in the most joy in my own life and am having the most fruitful experience and perspective. Now, everyone has to find that, what that is for them. You know?
Yeah, beautiful. Very nice. I think you have to go back to your kids, right?
Yeah, I heard one knocking on the door just now, which is a sign to go.
Yeah, I have plenty of other topics we could talk about, but maybe I don't know if you have the time, we can do another one at some point.
Yeah, we could always do it again.
All right, perfect. I thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
it was great.
Yeah, if for any of the people listening, I have a free guide on my website, jasonpickard.org, which I'm sure Max can link to.
Sure.
If you go there, you can download for free like a 27-page guide that I put together called My 8 Keys to Greater Wealth and Well-Being. This is something I spent a lot of time on, and it's a document that you can download for free, and you can get 8 keys that can give you more productivity, creativity, abundance that you can do today that won't cost you any more time, money, or energy or resources. It's 8 things that I feel compelled to share with everybody so that they can have more abundance right now. From there, you have the opportunity, if you feel called to learn more about my course, you can actually book a free discovery call with me and get on a call with me for 30 minutes, and we can go deeper into whether or not the abundance archetype is something of interest to you. So, but I really highly recommend that free guide, The 8 Keys to Greater Wealth and Well-Being. Or you can follow me on Instagram at Jason Pickard Official, where I try to do my best to put out interesting information. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Perfect. Thanks for your time, man.
Yeah, man.
Pleasure. Nice.